Hi everyone, welcome to the A Song of Ice and Fire reread with the lovely Clare Gray. We are looking at Jon 2 to Bran 3 today, and that is chapter 10 to chapter 17. So if I will link down below last week's session where we read all the way up to, or we discussed all the way up to Tyrion 9. We're going to keep it much shorter, I think, today. And it will be just spoilers all the way. So if you don't want spoilers, you know, maybe you shouldn't watch it. Hopefully there won't be too many spoilers, but this is a reread for us. So we're going to treat it as a reread from now on. So I'm going to shoot it over to Clare. And Clare, we are starting with Jon 2. And this is Jon's last moments in Winterfell, and he has a couple of encounters with Cat, Rob, and Arya. So what did you make of this?
Yeah, so this is Jon leaving his childhood home and saying his goodbyes, and it's quite clear from this chapter that the positive interaction that he has is with Arya. That's the key. That's the key relationship. In fact, the most positive sibling interaction between all of them so far has been Jon and Arya, which in a way makes me worry a little bit for later on, for like a bittersweet ending, because their interaction is positive and they obviously have strong feelings for each other. I have questions again about Cat in this chapter, so I'll just give you the points that were raised here for me. And I've just got WTF is Cat's problem with Jon. Why is she so cruel? I don't know. Bastards are quite common, so it's not an unusual thing, but it just seems to be like something specific against Jon. And it just, again, all the questions that it raises around Jon being of the same age to Rob. You know, why does she hate him so much? Is it because he's a threat to her son? Why is she, if that's the case, why is she worried about legitimacy? Why is she so worried about him being any kind of a threat? Well, I don't understand what her agenda is there with Jon. A couple of things in the dialogue when she says, "We don't want you here." This, of course, is when Jon goes to see Bran and gives his final farewells to Bran. There's a couple of things that I think we could take as a double meaning when she says, "We don't want you here." Well, who? Because it seems to be that it's only you that has a problem with Jon. So when you say we, I know that she's referencing her and Bran, but I just think that potentially could be double meaning. And when she says it should have been you, what should have been you? Is that, again, could that be a double meaning? And the only other thing that I've got from this is the interaction with Jon and Arya, when he says that different, again, this is all spoilerish and conjecture and speculation for the future, but that quote, "different roads sometimes lead to the same castle," which to me means that they will meet again. You know, that's kind of prophesizing that they will, foreshadowing that they will meet again at some point in the future, even though we know in the books and where we're at in the books at the moment, they've not seen each other for a long, long time. And it doesn't appear that, you know, they're going to be running into each other anytime soon. So yeah, I suppose the big key thing for me in this chapter is, why is Cat so horrible to Jon? It just feels to me like there's something deeper there.
She's total bitch. Total bitch in this chapter. And it's one of those chapters where you'd love the other POV, like to accompany it, because I feel like you would get the answer to that question, because it goes against Tully words, family, duty, honor. It's very dishonorable what she's doing, because it's her husband's son, regardless of like where he came from. At least afford him the same respect you'd give a stable boy. Like, she doesn't speak to the servants like that. So it's just, it's kind of completely out of whack. But Jon says to her, "It's not your fault what happened to Bran." And she says, of course not, or I don't need any of your absolution, bastard. And I wonder though, does she think it's her fault? Like the whole way through, she kind of suggests that, yeah, she takes these things. She's very the Faith of the Seven is very Catholic in its in the way people feel guilt, especially through Cat. So I wonder about that as well. It's just so horrible when she says it should have been you. And it's just like, why? Like, why? There's no need to say that. And yeah, I liked the Rob and John thing. I think that's very, like, it's a lot of foreshadowing for Clash later on, and Storm of Swords. Just him saying black was always his color, which, you know, if you R plus L equals J, that kind of, you know, works as well. And I liked, I think last week you talked about Ghost being the older pup. And just that Nymeria stops as soon as Ghost arrives. She just, like, it's almost like she stands to attention as soon as Ghost comes in. And also the way Jon says to Arya, I mean, it's one of those chapters that people quote a lot in the fandom because there's so many lines in it that are important for foreshadowing. But when Jon says, don't tell Sansa, you know, about Needle, and the fact that it's a Braavosi type sword. And I also made a note of the different roads lead to the same castle. And I just wondered, yeah, I mean, we assume that it's Winterfell, but could be Castle Black, could be the Red Keep or something like that. My question about this chapter is, why don't we get a scene with Jon and Ned? Why don't we get a goodbye scene with them? They give it in the TV show, but we never get it in a book.
Yeah, I made reference to that actually in Ned's chapter later on that we're coming to. There was no Winterfell farewell with Ned. You just go straight into, he's on the road with Robert. And it's like, oh, wow, okay. You would have thought him being the Lord of Winterfell, there would be more, at least, I mean, it was referenced to that Cat was just in the, you know, she didn't even come down and say goodbye to everybody. She was up in Bran's bedroom, which again, I've got questions about that.
I do too, yeah.
So yeah, this chapter really is Jon leaving, his goodbyes to his siblings. Some he seems to have a stronger relationship with others, and just how horribly cruel Cat is, and wondering what her motivations are. Like you say, it goes completely against the Tully way of looking at things.
And so far, I think with Arya, Jon is one of those POV characters so far in the book that what you see is what you get. There's no like ulterior motives. There's nothing he's trying to repress. And it just, I think it just adds to the tragedy of this kid's life. Like, he's 14 and she says that it should have been him that almost died. Yeah, it's horrible. It's just horrible. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to I was going to say a cheerful chapter, but it's Dany too. And we're actually jumping back in time. We're now December 297, so we're back in time even before anything we've seen at Winterfell. So this is back. This is again even before Bran 1, I think, right? So I think it's before Bran 1 even. Yeah, it's way before Bran 1. So yeah, so it's just to keep a track of that because it'll be important for when something magical happens later on, because we'll see that more and more then, or the beginnings of something magical. So yeah, so Dany too. People find this chapter very controversial for some reason.
I think the controversy is around Dany's age, isn't it? That's I would see that as the main controversy. But if you think about how the books have been written, and that it's, I mean, I think you've got to put this into context. I have the same arguments come up when you think about Mercy, the Mercy chapter, much later on, again in the Winds of Winter, which we've not even, I mean, I'm talking about spoiler chapters from the books that haven't even been published yet, but the same controversy about the ages of the children and marriage and the expectation that there'll be, you know, intimate relationships between spouses, and it's this, the way I see it is just very simply this kind of thing happens within this historical context. I mean, even in today's society, there are young girls of the age of like 9 upwards in certain cultures and civilizations that are forced to marry. So yeah, you know, I think that nothing's particularly sugar coated within these books, which I appreciate, the kind of gritty realism of it. I didn't feel uncomfortable really with it at all. There's you know, I mean, it's easy to sort of think, oh, Khal Drogo must have been a paedophile because Daenerys was only 14, and there's clearly a sex scene in this chapter. But actually, I think she seems to be pretty in control of
I think so
what's
too.
going on.
I think people,
Yeah.
that was the one thing I hated about the show, that they made it look like it was rape.
Yes, in fact, if anyone's acting kind of a bit sort of virginal in this scene, I would say it was Drogo.
Yeah. And I think it serves to show that the Dothraki, and again, I think with the others later, that they're not the barbarians and the savages that people should expect them to be. And also, I think it's actually quite sexist to assume that Dany, even for her age, can't enjoy her sexual encounter for the first time.
Yeah.
And can't be in somewhat control of the situation. I think that's equally sexist.
I think it's interesting actually that you say that, because I think with the point of views, we only get to see the impression of somebody else's culture through the eyes of an observer. And you know, I mean, there could be things like related it to the sort of historical context of the story, racism, for example, towards the Dothraki, for want of another phrase. But it's a cultural thing. Sometimes we have a fear of different cultures because we don't understand aspects of that culture. And it was Illyrio or Jorah at the wedding that was, you know, when they were talking about different customs. And I think it must have been Illyrio that was saying that the Dothraki have no, but basically they have no the concept of things like shame. It just doesn't, that they don't have the same way of looking at things. But that doesn't necessarily mean to say that they're evil or nasty. It just means that they have a completely different viewpoint on the world that's very different from the observer, in this case Mom. And I actually found it quite interesting in this chapter. I think it was referenced that the furthest east that Jorah had ever been, because I thought he was a complete explorer, he'd been everywhere, but actually he's only been as far as Vaes Dothrak. He hadn't been, so when he travels further on later, he's actually not as well travelled as I thought he was in my mind.
Actually, they're the two characters that I'm watching the most in these Dany chapters.
Yeah.
Khal Drogo and Jorah. I'm kind of seeing Khal Drogo in a completely new light on this read. I feel he knows a lot more than he lets on, actually. And I think he's a lot more in on Illyrio's plans than... and I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I'm kind of wondering, does he actually... Is there an actual attempt on Illyrio's part to actively try and get dragons brought back into the world through Dany? I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. I know there's a whole other plot with Illyrio as well. But the Dothraki, we get mentioned. I think it's in, like, it's a couple of chapters there. It might even be the next chapter. It's mentioned that they value dragon bone and dragon glass, or dragon bone over anything else. Like, it's really valuable to Dothraki. And it just kind of made me think, like, I think there's a lot more going on with the Dothraki, and they're a lot more savvy and educated than we think. I mean, the Mongols, that's who they're based on, and the Mongols they actually shunned certain practices of civilization because they believed it just added to ego, and it added to, and that there's problems with ego. When you bring ego into a civilization, it actually creates more problems for the group. So shunning things like possessions and houses and that kind of thing is actually, it's quite from the Mongols. That, I think that comes down to the Dothraki.
And in a way that kind of makes sense to me. You know, human civilization is,
says Clare with all her nail polish.
I know. It's riddled though with ego and power and possessions that have destroyed massive aspects of humanity. I've been spending a lot of time with Marwyn this week because he's still kind of going through recovery. But it was funny, the physio this week was talking about him getting better. This does kind of relate, don't worry. And she was saying that when animals get injured, they just get on with it. They're very practical. They're much more practical than humans, so they recover quicker and easier. And I said, it's fascinating really when you think about it, because for humans, if the same thing happened, you're like, oh my God, this has happened to, and she said, exactly, it's just it's the baggage, it's the ego, emotional baggage that, oh my God, all my possessions. And actually, is that necessarily the right, you know, is it the right way to look at things? It's just that, again, very interesting that we get the structure of the chapters as point of views, because we're being asked as a reader to make assumptions about certain cultures and civilizations that actually may be much more progressed and advanced and better for the people generally than we, you know, who are we to know at this stage? But it was interesting that actually, yes, we can see that the Dothraki can be quite gentle when they want to be, and they have, you know, there's humor and there's some form of identifiable humanity that outwardly we're not supposed to think that. We're supposed to think that they're, you know, this horde of screaming rebels. But I think you're right.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, I think you're right. I do think that Khal Drogo probably knows a little bit more, and you know, and there's some plan. There's some plan there.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I actually made a note of that, because the next chapter is Ed's chapter, where he's having this conversation with a clearly insecure, self-conscious Robert Baratheon, who isn't happy with all of his possessions and his ego. And there's a line where Viserys said, "When am I getting my crown?" And it just kind of struck me that Khal Drogo wants Dany. He wants the girl. And the crown will come later. Like, he's not interested in the crown right now. He's not interested in any of that. He wants to kind of mix up the pool genetically, introduce this like pure Targaryen into his group. Whereas for the good of the group as well, not just for him, for the good of the group. And meanwhile, you know, Viserys is going crazy in the background, ego. And then like Robert, he was very ego driven. Like, and I have a lot of questions when we get to Robert later on. Like, why was it Ned that went for the girl? Why didn't Robert go get his own girl? Why, like, if it's all about Lyanna, why did he end up coming away with a throne that he didn't want and possessions that are making him unhappy? And I love how George kind of structures these novels to kind of draw your attention to those very subtle details. You only really pick up on, I think, on your second or third or fourth or sixth reread.
I just think that Robert is a classic example of somebody who has complete false memories of something that they think they felt many years ago, and it's just they've created their own reality around it, and stuck their everything into this, you know, and that's seemingly how he feels about Lyanna. But I mean, that's a different story. But just
I do think that Khal Drogo in this chapter shows what a king is.
Yes.
He shows very clearly what a king is. He's very gracious. He doesn't overreact. He doesn't when there's all this violence and sex in front of him, he just watches. He doesn't, like Dany describes how he's just watching, and it's scary for her because the type of rulers that she's seen is just Viserys. And heard stories of her father and presumably stories of Robert, where they're all bombast and just all me. Khal Drogo is completely opposite, even though he's supposed to be like from this, you know, savage background. And I do like the way, like, she sees a man die for the first time, and she sees presumably like sex for the first time all in one go, and she kind of goes with the sex. She goes with the more life-affirming kind of choice, and that's going to be later on contrasted with Ed and I nearly said Ed and Ned, Ed and Robert talking over graves of first men. And it's very well done. But I'm sorry, I completely cut you off. Did you have anything you wanted to say?
Just going back to the thing about like having everything, you know, being king and having everything, Robert having all his possessions, and also I think there's a kind of mirroring in a way around the riding the horses, when Dany gets on the horse and she's like, what, this is the first time I've not felt fear, and there's that rush of kind of power and independence that she gets, and like contrasted with how Robert feels on the, like, come on, let's just go off and be, you know, hedge knights, and that feeling of freedom riding, and it was just I mean, and sometimes there are links between the, you know, subtle little chains in between these chapters, and in big events like the Red Wedding, there's definitely, you know, from different points of view, the same event happening. But I do think that's now and again there are more subtle, just little bits and pieces that tie one chapter to another. And just show the difference between characters. But just going back to Dany, a couple of things that I picked out on this chapter about everything significant and important in the Dothraki's life, culture, is outside beneath the open sky. And I just wondered, is this feels like it's also true for Dany? Like later on down the line with the funeral and the birth of the dragons, and rarely will I reference the TV show, but certainly in the TV show, the whole, you know, unburnt scenes that happen, it's all out, you know, outside in the open, where everyone's kind of pledging themselves to her, and this feeling of power. An obvious question that I'm hoping that you have thought about and may have an answer for is Viserys. How will the Targaryen dynasty continue? Is he that limited that he can only see his own ego of, I am the, because if he's marrying off his sister, then how is he going to continue the Targaryen line?
I think he's naive. I think he's naive enough to think that he can marry her off and potentially be able to take out Khal Drogo later on and take her back. I think he's that stupid. I think he thinks that once he goes back to Westeros, everybody's going to welcome him, and then he'll have that army, and they can go take on Drogo. Like and he may not even be that far-sighted. It is interesting that she has the dream in this chapter where her thighs are slicked with blood, and there's a dragon in front of her, and I think she assumes it's Viserys, but it will, and she also says there are no dragons when she sees him. Like, the dragons are gone. I think he's just that stupid. I really do. I'm desperate.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, it's strange that it wasn't referenced in any of Dany's thoughts, though, about, you know, what happens to this family, this Targaryen dynasty, because there is a lot of self-affirmation from Dany this chapter. She's several times doing this mantra of, I am, you know, blood of the dragon, Daenerys Stormborn. She's kind of bigging herself up.
But she's just echoing what Viserys said. Like, Viserys presumably has some pretty juvenile memories of what it was like to be in the palace surrounded by dragon bones and be part of the Targaryen mindset, but she doesn't. Like, she's completely like, when I feel like as this chapter moves on, she's feeling more at home with this group, that she can instantly see how it works. Like, she instantly recognized the hierarchy because they come in order of importance: the men, horses, women, children, slaves. So she instantly like knows where she fits in.
Yeah.
And then she is also placed above Viserys in this chapter.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I think, and I said this with the last chapter as well. She says she always assumed she'd have to marry Viserys.
Yes.
But I think the lack of a female role model in her life, like with the lack of a female role model in Jon's life, is very telling, especially around her ideas with sex and things like that. I wonder, had she had a female?
I still wonder what happened to that wet nurse who was supposed to have escaped with Darry and her and Viserys. I wonder what happened there.
What is Darry to the Darrys that are hosting?
Well, they're from the same house. I don't know what the
I should have looked that
relation
up.
is.
What the relation is, yeah.
But they were Targaryen loyalists.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in the dream, the reference to, I mean, we've heard Viserys talk about waking the dragon, and it's, again, as readers, we're led to assume that that means losing my temper. You know, I'm a Targaryen, we're dragons, don't wake the dragon. But linking to Dany's dream, we're kind of start beginning to ask these questions of, is this it? Waking is an awakening, so some form of awakening. Again, does it necessarily relate to just losing your temper, or is it an awakening of something else? Like, and again, with it linked to kind of hormones and stuff as well, and her perceptions and seeing a dragon. I think that's before she gets the dragon eggs, isn't it? Before she gets the bridal gifts.
Yeah.
So, and I just wonder if she's dreaming about basically the birth of that magical event.
Yeah.
And that waking the dragon is not losing your temper. It's kind of an awakening of magic in the world. But yeah, Viserys, I've got a couple of notes here about him, just that I don't know where he's got his ideas from, but just silly things like the fact that his gift was to give her 3 handmaids, which they'd chosen carefully, and it's like, well, basically that's like slaves. So he's, you know, his gift to her was 3 slaves. And later on, she's like breaker of, you know, that's supposed to be like everything that she's against. The eggs I took as like children, because she refers to them as her children all the time. So it's like she was given children on her wedding night. So she got her husband and her children all on the same night. The beginning of her having feelings for Drogo before the sex scene and him being very kind of gentle and almost virginal with her. He was the one who gave her the silver filly. And like I said before, this is the first time that she's been given independence. So it's kind of like, you know, your new guy, your new fella is saying, this is what you're part of, but also here's something for you that's just for you, that's your power and your independence. And she felt that as she was riding around, this kind of feeling of not being afraid for the very first time in her life. So again, that's kind of that's another an awakening. So, you know, there's just this phrase, waking the dragon, I think means more than just losing your temper.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's funny because we went to see it during the week, a big group of us, and I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but I recommend it. It's really good. But there's a girl similar age to Dany, and her biggest fear is blood. And I was trying to think, I think that was my biggest fear at that age, because you're still getting a handle on everything, and it is one of those things that you're afraid like of, and it's to do with, you know, virginity and all that kind of thing. But for Dany as well, it's to do with violence, because of what the violence that Viserys inflicts on her, and she assumes that she's going to have to put up with that kind of violence in her marriage. But as you say, there's definite feelings developing with Khal Drogo in this, and blood will take on a whole different meaning for Dany. What did you think of the idea that all her gifts come in threes, apart from the horse?
Which three? Well, there are lots of significance to numbers throughout this entire series. You know, 13, 7 gods, 3 heads of the dragon.
Because she gets 3 handmaids, 3 weapons, 3 dragon eggs, and I don't know if we're told about how many books she gets from Jorah. I know in the show it looked like he gave her 3 books. But yeah, I just found that interesting that it's just seemed the number 3 seemed to come over and over again. So
I've not really noticed that, but yeah, you're right.
And I did like how just the juxtaposition of the savagery of Khal Drogo and the civilized Viserys. You know, Khal Drogo's in these kind of horse leathers, and Viserys is in like golden or green garb or something like that. Like, it's just, he's supposed to be the civilized one, but he's not. He's just horrible. But
and now she's married and she's got a husband, and they seem to be getting on okay. So she's now got the position shifts massively. In terms of her relationship with her brother, she's always done everything that Viserys has said and been completely subservient to him. And it's like, you know, tables have now turned.
Well, he probably didn't realize it until it happened, just what it meant. That she's now like, because she says to Khal Drogo, "You've given me the wind," and like and she's been given fire. She doesn't know it yet, but like it's all these things that Viserys isn't even has a hope of getting. But so that's Dany's chapter, and then we move into Ed's chapter, and Ed is called by Robert to take a ride and discuss a matter of state, which nicely feeds into the Dany chapter. Comes from the Dany chapter, because he has found out that Dany has married Khal Drogo. Of course, this is many months after the marriage. So at this stage, we already know she's going to be pregnant at this stage, but he doesn't know that yet. And we also find out in this chapter that he's getting all the information from Jorah, which is really disappointing. To instantly find out that Dany is surrounded by, or is with like a spy of Robert Baratheon, and he's so unreasonable in this chapter. So I have a few questions here, more questions actually, but the insecure Robert Baratheon, what did you make of him in this chapter?
I think very insecure. I've put a couple of things really about that. This is more towards the end of the chapter, when Robert seems very uncomfortable at even the mention of his brother's name, of Stannis's name. Which makes me think, is there more history there between Stannis and Robert that we don't know about, or we don't get to know about? I don't quite understand how Robert has managed to get himself quite so manipulated by the Lannisters to the point where, as even Ned, who's not a very political person, can see that naming Jaime, and again, question mark, he's Kingsguard, so why would he be given? I can't even remember this. I can't remember from my initial read of the books that Robert has pretty much promised Jaime the position of,
isn't it? Oh no, sorry,
Warden of the Warden of the East, rather than little Robert, sweet Robin.
Yeah.
So I don't quite understand, and his defensive position on any of that when Ned's questioning him is, well, you know, don't you forget, Ned, that, you know, basically the Starks were enemies of the Targaryens, and then he just goes on about his Targaryen hate again, and we're, you know, we're told about how they fell out about this issue about dragon spawn, that he just, you know, Robert doesn't even see. He can't, again, he's very short-sighted, very short-sighted, and doesn't seem to be able to see that he's pretty much giving away chunks of his realm. And I mean, just the fact that, and he doesn't seem bothered at all. And I know that, you know, he's all he's interested in is sort of drinking and whoring and what have you, but just pride in your name and yourself. And, you know, just like when Ned was saying that basically the Lannisters took King's Landing, there was no, you know, doing anything in Robert's name by the sound of it. The Lannister flags were put up everywhere, not Baratheon. Why is Robert not questioning these things? Why is he? It's like he's made his position extremely insecure just by being so short-sighted. And yeah, when they were talking about it took Lyanna's death to reconcile them again, I just think that's just Robert's blowing smoke out of his arse when he remembers Lyanna, because he can't remember that there was a good likeness in the crypts. He doesn't seem to remember he invented these stories that he doesn't really know about Lyanna being raped 1,000,000 times by Rhaegar. We don't know that that's happened, and neither does Robert.
And Ned doesn't confirm it.
Yeah, and it's interesting though that Robert seems to have to remind Ned that, oh yeah, the Starks were kind of versus the Targaryens at that point. Yeah, me dad, you know, me father and me brother and but it's like the way Ned seems to, it's the way that he doesn't remember that feud and that hatred that makes you question. Maybe things weren't that bad. Maybe Ned had a very different opinion of the Starks.
Well, I'm a bit confused because
of the Targs, I mean, yeah.
Like, what did they go to war? It's Robert's rebellion, right? But Robert's rebellion, yeah. And hi, AU, you're absolutely taking the words out of my mouth. First of all, it's Robert's rebellion for Lyanna, and then he brings up Brandon to say, like, your brother and father were so it wasn't for them though, right? It was for Lyanna, okay? And if it was for Lyanna, why did Robert even take King's Landing? Why did he even take the throne? Why doesn't he go to the Tower of Joy? Why, like, because I don't understand, and I don't understand why Tywin Lannister even took down his flags, his banners, like. Who was going to stop him from? Who was going to stop Jaime at that stage, apart from Ned? And I find the whole thing very confusing. I find his anger, his vengefulness, just like completely unrealistic and just very obsessive. And I can never decide: is he like manic depressed? Like, is he like, is he being influenced by something? Is somebody whispering in his ear? Because sometimes some of the things he says is just completely madness. Like, yeah, I don't understand. Like, and I find it it's interesting. I think it's because I made sure I looked this up to double check, but this is the only chapter in the entire series so far that has taken place in the Barrowlands. And yes, these are at the graves of the first men that they're having this conversation. And there's something, as you said, that the fact that he has to spell it out to Ned, it's like it's on a loop in his head all the time, the way he has to keep going through this with him. And Ned is saying, and also, sorry, I'm not making much sense, but how did Ned never tell him that story about Jaime? How is that only coming up now? What was the problem with bringing that up at the rebellion? Like when Ned knew that Robert was going to be marrying Cersei, why didn't he say it then? Well, listen, you know, I saw Jaime on the throne and all the Lannister banners up. Are you sure you want to marry Cersei? Because I think they have the eyes on the throne. Like, I don't know. I still don't really understand how Robert ended up in the position to take the throne. I know there's Targ blood in the Baratheons, but I find the whole thing, I feel like it's either George's way of leaving room to do prequel, so that he can come back and have a Robert's Rebellion novel or something. But there's a lot of questions about it. The timeline as well doesn't seem to make much sense to me.
Well, it's just the relationship between Ned and Robert when they fell out. I mean, what we know is they were fostered together at the Eyrie and they grew up as brothers. And they fought together in Robert's rebellion. They also fell out over the issue of dragon spawn, and it apparently took Lyanna's death to reconcile them. But I think Ned couldn't wait to get back north and out of all that, whatever it was that had happened, whatever this whole mystery is that's part of these characters. I think that something happened that made Ned want to just get out of Dodge completely and back up to the north. And I don't really think that Robert and Ned really kept in contact with each other that much over the next 15 years. I think when the royal party turn up at Winterfell in the first few chapters, that it's been an age since they, you know, they're trading on childhood memories of like being, you know, best friends when they were younger. And I think that Ned feels extremely uncomfortable around Robert. And I think Robert is just he's not got his own thoughts. He's manipulated, influenced to a point where he's kind of whipped almost by the Lannisters. I mean, really, is Tywin that good to you know, to just be able to completely manipulate Robert into basically giving half the realm to the Lannisters? And just, you know, just generally in the story, Cersei, and it's just, how can they get away with just being, she refers to, they're all, that you never ever think that Cersei and the children are Baratheons. You always think of them as Lannisters, even when Robert's still alive.
And the fact that he allows the Crown Prince to bear his mother's arm on the shield. Like Stannis wouldn't do that. Renly wouldn't do that. Well, Renly might do that. Be a rose though. But like and not for Marjorie. But like I feel like there's times where he comes across as this like supreme example of masculinity in the novel and in the realm, but he's completely emasculated by the Lannisters. And he goes on and on and on about Lyanna and honouring her, and like it's quite, he is dishonouring Lyanna's memory by surrounding the North with Lannisters.
Just to point out, in the comments, John and Merjam, I always say Miriam. Tell me how to pronounce your name. Miriam Merjam, I think from Holland, and about the Baratheons having Targaryen blood in their ancestry. So you would think, again, that makes me question, why is Robert so fiercely anti-Targaryen? You can't just pin this on this childhood crush that he had on Lyanna.
But it's 3 centuries of rule, right? The Targs had about that 300 years of rule.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
I always found that, like, I don't know if the next leader necessarily needed to have Targ blood. to be king. Like, I don't think that the small folk care as long as the war stopped.
Well, no, you can win the Iron Throne by force.
Yeah.
You know, you don't, the bloodlines, etc., don't really matter. You can just, you know, anyone can walk up and place themselves on the Iron Throne if they
Like, I don't know why.
win
I
it.
don't know why Ned leaves King's Landing to go to Tower of Joy. Why doesn't Robert go straight from the Trident? I know he's injured and he has to take a break, but I don't understand why he then goes direct to King's Landing. Why doesn't he go to Tower of Joy and get her himself if he loves her that much? Like,
Yeah.
and if he started this war for, like, I feel like there's something missing. There's a connect there missing. And I also like what you were saying about how often do they see each other. When did he find out about Wyla and John? I don't know if we ever know that, do we? When he found out that Ned had a bastard. When did he get those details? Like that it was Wyla.
That sounds like it was a long time ago, because in the conversation that they're having about what was her name again, and
yeah.
oh, you
but
know,
did they have it like they had to have had the conversation after the Tower of Joy, right? But Ned doesn't go back to King's Landing after Tower of Joy. He goes back to the north. So, and then we assume they don't see each other again until the Iron Island rebelling. I don't know.
Well, you know, there are arguments that John is Ned's bastard, and that John is older, and this happened way before, maybe even like going back to, you know, how old were they when they stopped being wards at the Eyrie? Maybe this is going right back to, like, you know, Ned's first love as they were growing up, and like were the teenagers. I don't, you know, I mean, there would have been.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be anti or plus L equals J for Ned to have had an affair with a girl.
No, not at all.
So no. Yeah, it's one of those things that I find that the timeline very sketchy, and I don't know if it ever gets cleared up.
So, no, it never does. It never does. I think it's deliberately left that way. Yeah,
I feel like this chapter further kind of further reaffirms my belief that Jon Arryn knows who Jon's mother is, or knows that there's more maybe potentially to Jon's heritage, because we're definitely told that he's the one who put a halt to Robert going after Dany and Viserys. Yeah. He's the one who stopped them going after the Targs. But as you said, it is strange that he's so anti-Targ when he's a Baratheon. And yeah, I don't know, like, he killed Rhaegar. And I don't know, I feel like there's something not quite right with Robert there. There's something that keeps triggering this.
There's a very good theory that MP has got, actually, that I'm not even sure if he's ever talked about it in any of his rambling videos that he does. So I don't really know if I should say anything about it, but it's about Stannis, and potentially why Robert may have a bit of a bee in his bonnet about Stannis. And Stannis, just thinking back to the Baratheon and the Targaryen history of the blood being intertwined way back, and right at the very beginning as well, if you look in the World of Ice and Fire, there's a Baratheon always seemed to be, I think, one of, like, Aegon's best friends was a Baratheon way back in the day. You know, so they were very close right from the very beginning. That Stannis there may be a whole different story that happened at Storm's End, and maybe what we think of, you know, who are you loyal to, your brother or the king?
Yeah.
Now, in the story, it seems as though we're led to believe that ultimately Stannis was loyal to his brother, and then his brother let him down, and that's why they were a bit bristly with each other. But maybe that wasn't the case. Maybe that wasn't the case, and maybe Stannis was not loyal to his brother.
Yeah. That's possible, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a whole other area that would leave
But
for
there's a weird
anybody to get in.
relationship with Renly as well, which
Yeah.
we'll see a hint of later on. I find in particular his treatment of Joffrey and his acceptance of the kind of boy Joffrey is.
Yeah.
I feel that's a big red flag as well, as to like Robert's mental state, and I don't know, maybe he got hit on the head too hard.
Maybe he's just drunk every single day and just doesn't give a shit about what's going on around him at all.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just too much. It's too overwhelming. All he wants to do is what he's always ever wanted to do, which is drinking and whoring and feasting himself to death.
Like I often wonder, like, because sometimes men like that are very aggressive. This complete general statement there, but like there are at least male characters that are portrayed as being very aggressive and very pleasure driven. They often are very insecure about their intellectual aptitude, and definitely if he's coming up against Tywin and Cersei to a certain degree, who are obviously more intelligent, and then up against Stannis, who's obviously more intelligent, and Renly, who's more likable. Like I feel like that's when Robert's insecurity just shows even more. And he dehumanizes the Targaryens in a really like horrible way, saying that they're dragon spawn, and like Ned says, but like think of what Tywin did to those children. Yes. And like he just calls them dragon spawn, and I guess I mean he'd have to do that to be able to sleep at night, right?
Yeah.
But and he said he wished he could have gone after Dany and Viserys when he had the chance, when they were in Pentos, right? So yeah, I don't know, a bit there's a lot more questions here.
He's got quite a juvenile approach to life, I think, really, Robert. And just to point out that in this chapter we're reminded, if we didn't know through previous chapters of Ned's children, Robert reminds us of Ned's honor. You know, when they were talking about when they were young and like, oh, you know, we can't do things like that, we're not young anymore, and Robert's like, well, you were never like that anyway. We're reminded of Ned's honor yet again, but at the end of the chapter, in Ned's head, in his point of view, he talks about having to carry this burden of 14 years of lies. So again, you know, we think of Ned as being very noble, but at the same time we know that he's carrying something. It seems as though he's sort of tortured about it, but I don't know, maybe he's not. It's just, you know, we see Ned as very honourable, but something's happened there where there's been like lies upon lies upon lies, and it's about how we can unravel that, I guess.
Yeah, and Robert says to him, the others take your honour, which like if you personify that honor as either Dany or Jon later on, maybe they will. So yeah, and there's also something about Ned feeling like he was watched by the skulls of the dragons, I believe, in this chapter. He said something about seeing the dragons once and feeling like that they were watching him. And that'll come up again later in Tyrion's chapter.
Yes.
And it's just a nice follow on from Dany getting the dragon eggs. This thread, that's really nice. So yeah, I think that's it for Robert and Ned. Shall we move on to Tyrion, who is having a great old time going north?
So this is the chapter where the party is on the way to the wall,
and the north goes on. The north went on forever.
Well, just again to point out how ridiculous the zooming around in the TV show was. They were talking about, there's reference to them being 18 days into the ride from Winterfell to the wall, and they're not even there yet. So it takes weeks and weeks and weeks. I mean, I was listening to it earlier, and Stuart, I made this reference, and Stuart was pointing out that it might be different if it's not a party where you've got wagons and supplies, etc. If you're just riding, then maybe you can get there quicker. But you know, not as quick as they do on the TV show unless you've got rocket fueled horses. But yeah, this chapter, just to summarize, there's you know, personifies Tyrion as a reader. For a lot of people in the fandom, I think they feel that Tyrion is the reader, and a lot of how the books and the story is interpreted about how we might feel is through Tyrion. The relationship between Jon and Tyrion, which I thought was quite sweet, the way that it was like the humor, and you know, Jon might be very cold and of the north, but actually he has got a bit of a sense of humor as well when they're talking about Grumpkins and Snarks at the end. And it's Jon's kind of beginning to grow up a little bit as well, and you can see that through Tyrion's eyes, that he gives him the reality of exactly what it's going to be like at the Wall. And although Jon initially reels against that, he ends up accepting that at the end of the chapter. And, you know, he realizes if that's what it is, then that's what it is. Just a couple of things that I just wanted to make reference to. Tyrion's fascination with dragons, and him talking about, you know, he used to pretend when he was a child that he was a dragon rider, and he was fascinated with the dragons at King's Landing and the dragon skulls as being beautiful. And also that I think this is quite profound, but maybe not. We'll see. We get a glimpse of the last of the dragons, and there were these small, stunted versions of dragons. You could almost say that they were, and Tyrion in the books is described as dwarf, small, stunted. So I just thought that that was quite interesting, the reference to the last of the dragons being small, like Tyrion. So, you know, maybe that's a link there. I thought it was interesting about the dragons being referenced. The names of the dragons were named after gods, because it's like, which gods? Which ones were called Meraxis? Which religion is that? Meraxis, Valerian, and Rhaegar. Not
a religion that was dropped. That was forgotten about. Yeah. Not
one that we've ever heard of, or anything that I can, unless I'm missing something really obvious here.
Isn't there something about Aegon converting to the Seven later when he first arrived?
I mean, the names sound very Valyrian, certainly not Westerosi. So we're maybe talking about some kind of Valyrian religion, which again, without having the World of Ice and Fire to hand, I don't know of which religion the singers were referring to when the dragons were named. Yeah, what else I've got? Yeah, Tyrion just saying that he makes his own way in his life, as he has all his life. So it's kind of, he's there, you know, projecting that he's got his own agenda. He kind of describes his own family members, Joff, as grotesque, and you know, so we immediately warm to Tyrion as readers. I think there's a lot that we're fed here in the story. At the beginning of the series, we're fed Starks are good, Lannisters are bad. Here's a Lannister who doesn't like his own family and talks about making his own way in life and having his own agenda. We like him. He's a good character. So these are things that are established with us, but that I'm now on this reread beginning to question completely. That, you know, we're given this, and I'm questioning a lot of the things that were just taken for granted, that they're just established. But I think this, where we're at now and how we feel about the characters now, would be very different if you took all of those Stark point of views out up to, like, where are we, chapter 13 now?
Yeah.
If you took all of that out and it was
More Lannister focused or more
Lannister focused, or Baratheon, or inside Viserys' head or whatever, we would get a completely different position of where we're at now.
If you were reading this for the first time, Jaime, like, he's described as very king-like and beautiful and like your typical kind of knight in shining armor. Okay, he's like riding his sister, but we'll ignore that for a minute. But he's vilified to such an extent that you can't possibly see ever sympathizing with this guy ever. Like he tried to kill a kid, I think you're totally right. But the same with Tyrion and this chapter, like, how could we ever turn against this guy? There's never a chance. But I think by the end of Dance, a lot of people are like, whoa, Tyrion? I'm not sure about Tyrion anymore. Like there's something about Tyrion that's our Feast, maybe. Dance. Feast, Dance. Where's Tyrion in? Dance, right? Anyway, I'm jumping ahead. But I loved the chapter. It strikes me that with Jon and Tyrion, it's the one time I don't think you need a POV from the other character, because they're being very real and very honest with one another. And I don't need to know what Jon is thinking. Just like I didn't need to know what Tyrion was thinking when we saw him in Jon 1. I just feel like they're very, very honest with one another. And I think the same with Arya and Jon as well. I think that will be flipped later in the series. And we haven't seen any of those characters come back together yet. And I don't know, will they in Winds? But I think that's all going to be flipped. Later on, we're going to be like, oh God, what's Jon thinking now? Because so much will have happened to them. So it's quite interesting that we're already being set up with those three characters not needing the POVs of the others. But again, I think he'll subvert that, turn it on its head later on for the bittersweet ending that you were even like, that everybody's worried about, But the thing that interested me was how Tyrion described the road north, as being well populated, well trafficked, is what he said, and there's just people kind of everywhere, and there's inns, and it starts to get sparse as they move towards the wall, but initially there's lots of people around, and that conflicts with what Robert says to Ned when we were talking about last week, when he said, like, where are all your people? And again, it makes me question the validity and the support of Robert's kingship and the support for it. And I think that he knows that. I think he's savvy enough to know that, half the houses didn't fight with me. I've married into a family that nobody really likes. Everybody knows what Tywin did to the reigns of Castamere. It feels as if I don't know. I think it feels as if war was inevitable. Like that this kingship. Like, I don't think under any circumstance, by the time we get to the end of Sansa's chapter, I don't think anyone would have accepted King Joffrey. Just from I think he's a few years away from being the complete Ares almost. So it's one of those things that I wondered, like, because nobody was around when Robert went north, like, are they hiding from him? Are they do they not want to come out and show support for him? Like, wave the flag, Like, it was just an interesting thing that he said there. And Benjen's distaste for the Lannisters is really palpable. And Benjen doesn't come across as like this friendly old uncle in this chapter.
No. He's quite. Just to say, Miriam was saying that she's got the world of Ice and Fire open, and that in the book it says that the Targaryens believe in hundreds of gods.
Oh, so they're more like the ancient Greeks and Roman kind of.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Polytheistic.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I guess if you have dragons, you're going to have to up the ante on the amount of gods you have, because that's pretty lucky.
Yeah.
You're #blessed. I also liked how we start in this chapter, Ghost attacks Tyrion, and it's very quick and very quiet. And for the next, I think it's for the next 2 chapters, we're going to have attacks by wolves that are quiet and quick. and it's the first one is with Ghost. Again, just lending to your idea that he's the oldest. So he's the first to do this.
Yes.
The first attack from a wolf is from Ghost. So and yeah, Tyrion says that he has dreams of starting fires. It's not just dreaming of dragons, it's starting fires and burning his father. And he says he wonders, does Jon have those dreams? And Jon says he doesn't. But yeah, maybe he does. I don't know. Maybe Jon doesn't. Maybe he's the perfect song that he doesn't need it.
Maybe.
And just also when just the idea that Tyrion can go too far with something, with a joke, and go so far with something that he can't take it back. We're going to see him do that a lot throughout the series. And just the grumpins and snarks thing. I just wonder. I wonder what that's all about. Is it just to kind of feed into the myth of the others and kind of undermine people's beliefs? And I also love the line that most men would rather deny hard truths than face it. And I feel like that's what Robert is doing. Again, just feeding on from the last chapter. I feel like Robert just doesn't want to face hard truths. Like he didn't want to face the fact that Lyanna was lost forever. Like the idea that she's kidnapped. He goes with that. He doesn't want to face the fact that Jaime may have tried to take the throne or Tywin.
Yeah. He invents his own reality just to make himself feel a bit better, I think. Or to just satisfy his own ego.
It's just one of those things. And also, I wonder, I mean, how stupid do you have to be to realize that, like, to know that you've been cuckolded and that your brother-in-law's, I think, how can he not realize that he hasn't really had sex with Cersei that much to end up with 3 kids?
He just but he can't even, he can't fault. There's no, he can't fault Jaime at all. He can't find anything at all to agree with Ned on in this argument. He just kind of, and as it says at the end of the chapter, he just goes from, he gets angry and then he just laughs it off again. He just doesn't really take anything seriously. He's an idiot, Robert.
Yeah, he really is. So that's it for Tyrion. I do like that chapter. I love Jon and Tyrion scenes. And then we move on to, I think it's our biggest chapter. I think it's the longest of our chapters, but I don't think we'll have to talk about it for too long, but I think it is the longest. It's annoyingly long, I thought. I was like, I'm just like, come on, I don't need the description of the breakfast that she didn't eat. Anyway, this is Kat's chapter. There's quite a lot of plot here, but I do think that she reaches decisions quite slowly in this chapter. But there might be a reason for that. We have Kat obsessing over Bran as usual, and then someone tries to kill Bran, and Kat makes a decision that she needs to go to Ned and try and sort this out. But there's a few little things throughout this. My main question in this chapter is, childhood mortality is presumably very high in this kind of a world. Why is she so obsessed to the detriment of her 3-year-old son? Like, even with Rob, Rob he's old enough to be ignored almost, but like I feel really bad for Rickon in this. And she has duties. A family duty on her. She's forgetting about the duty part again. So so what do you think of her?
I just am beginning to really dislike Kat, and I never did the first read. I just saw her as the mother of the children, and having justifiable gripes where she had justifiable gripes. But again, she's been at Winterfell for 15 years almost now, and every single thought that she has about her home, she just doesn't seem to care about Winterfell. She describes it as an empty grey castle. I thought it was quite interesting right at the very beginning. She describes Lewin as a little grey rat, because that comes up later on with another character describing the Meisters, and as we could begin to start questioning what the Meisters' motives are. Absolutely completely confused about the fact that she's so obsessive about Bran, to the detriment of her own health, of her other children. Rob pleading with her, which must have taken something of his pride to sort of say, look, Mum, we kind of need you back, all of us, including me. What are you doing? What are you playing at? I think that why is she so obsessed? And then right at the very end, she seems to be happy to disappear and leave Bran. Oh, I'm just, it's sort of up to the gods now. I've done what I can. Really? What changed? Why are you now happy to leave Bran when you couldn't leave his side and couldn't eat and sleep? And that doesn't seem to make much sense to me at all. It kind of feels like she's got different agenda to what we understand her agenda to be. And she seems to be able to flick like that. And I'm trying to figure out, I'm sure it's fairly obvious, and as we go through, I'll be able to... I
think I have an explanation for it, actually.
Right.
I don't think Kat is in control of herself here. I think she's been influenced.
Right.
Whether it's Bloodraven or Bran, but the killer says a couple of times to her, you're not supposed to be here.
Yeah.
But I think she's been deliberately kept in the room. I think she's,
right.
Because she says that what was happening to her, she was so tired and her head hurt all of the time. I feel like if you're being manipulated, you're going to have headaches. Obviously, you're not going to be sleeping. Like, it's so out of character for the woman we're going to see moving forward. That and suddenly towards the end, as you said, like, she completely like turns on a dime and she's making decisions to leave completely. And she's so against the wolves because the howling is obviously driving her head crazy, because she can't handle that sound and whatever sound is in her head. I kind of feel that she had to be in the room to save his life. And so she was manipulated to be there. Now maybe I'm completely off, but I feel like she's being manipulated. I could be wrong.
Possibly, but something is changing. It just seems possibly, because it seems implausible how she seems to be able to.
They don't need her after that. After she saves him, they don't need, like, she doesn't need to be there anymore, and she flips.
Yeah. It's weird. The fact that, just again, questions and observations when she woke up after she finally managed to sleep, and she woke up and she felt that she felt kind of embarrassed about her previous behavior, and that she'd let everybody down, which she said, I let them all down. Again, going back to the family duty honored, who has she let down? Has she let down her children and her husband and John, even, maybe, by her behavior? Or she's confusing me. She's confusing me because she's talking about showing these Northerners how strong a Tully woman can be, and the whole, family duty honor. But so who is she letting down? Is she letting her own house down? Is she there on some kind of a mission from Hoster? What? Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that either.
Just the other thing that I wanted to mention about Summer, Rob again referencing that, like, clearly by the end of the chapter we know, and even Cat knows, Summer needs to be near Bran. He can protect him, and also, so the howling outside the window, it's like Summer, they've got some kind of premonition abilities, these wolves, because they seem to be able to know that there's going to be danger to their kind of human counterpart. And the Stark children also seem to know that they feel it's better when the wolves are nearby, that they're safer. And there are times throughout the story where the dire wolves are driven away from the children, whether that's forced or sometimes by choice, like later on with Rob and his wife and her family. You know, Cersei, for example, doesn't want wolves anywhere near. So there are times when it's an enforced thing, but they howl and they cry and they need to be near their, their human. And there's definitely a symbiotic emotional relationship, even in the pups and in the children. But that was really interesting what you said before about the attacks and the direwolves, because ultimately by the end of this chunk of chapters that we're reading, we say goodbye to Lady, which is horrific. I just remember reading that the first time in the books. The first time it was just, oh God, it was just awful. But she was the youngest. Ned describes her as being the youngest and the gentlest of the pups, or the smallest, not necessarily the youngest, but the smallest. So each of them seem to have, I mean, Grey Wind is a bit of a mystery at this point, and Shaggy Dog, but yeah, it's interesting.
Lady never attacks. She never even gets that far.
No.
It's so horrific, that part.
Yeah.
I did think as well, I really do feel like the cat thing being whispered to or manipulated in some way, especially when she screams at Rob to kill them all if you have to.
Yes.
When she says that about about the wolves. And it's like, well, how much are you willing to sacrifice for your son? Like if you see like the wolves as being, because it's Summer and Shaggy Dog that are howling. So are you really willing to sacrifice Rickon just to save Bran? Like, not like that she would kill Rickon, but that if we see the direwolves as kind of extensions of these kids, which they see them as extensions of themselves. I find that strange. I also think that the ineptitude and of the killers is a big red flag as to the naive plan or the scheme on behalf of whoever ordered this killing.
The decoy, the library fire decoy.
It's such a crap plan. So I think I think it shows that somebody who's quite immature that ordered the killing. And it is interesting because it's something that I didn't pick up on. But Kat is disfigured for life here. With her hand, and so is Joffrey later on. But it's just one of those things. I also liked at the end of the chapter, she kind of already starts her counselling of Rob, I should say. She's already starting to counsel him as if he's a leader, and trying to make him work things out for himself. Which is very important, I think. He's overly optimistic, Rob. He's too optimistic. And it's something that I don't know where the hell he got it from, because neither of his parents are that optimistic about life, but he's so optimistic, and it's ridiculous how optimistic he is. And it's also quite interesting that Theon, I think it's Roderick, says, oh, even the Kingslayer wouldn't kill an innocent, and Theon says, wouldn't he? As if like, because if you have to kill a kid, you have to kill a kid, right, Theon? So it's interesting that Theon is the one who says that, because he doesn't really contribute much else to.
And also that Sansa trusts him to be in the room when she reveals the contents of her sister's letter, and the Lannisters are the enemy. So we're setting all of that up, because later on she's again counselling. She just flip flops a lot, and it's questionable.
And why be okay with a ward of an enemy and not okay with the blood of your husband? Like I don't get the Theon thing. I really don't get the Theon thing. And also I think this is the first time we get the line that there must always be a Stark in Winterfell. I can't remember if Ned said that before.
That was the first time I noticed it.
Okay, and so does it have to be like a Stark that's of age? It's not good enough to leave Rickon and Bran then, obviously. They have to have somebody who's in charge.
Yeah, I was just thinking she doesn't see herself as a Stark. She's Lady Stark,
Yes.
but I don't think she sees herself as a Stark at all.
Yeah.
Needs to be a Stark in Winter. Oh yeah, that's me. Yeah, maybe I should stay.
Yeah.
My children are here.
It's a blood thing,
Bran.
obviously. Yeah. And Rob, yeah, like, but I don't understand why it's not okay just to leave Rickon and Bran for a few weeks. Like, I let Rob go. It has to be like an heir or something. I don't know. It's just something that, or it has to be the next heir. There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot with that I'd like to. And she ends the chapter by saying, when she gets to King's Landing, we shall see what we shall see, which is a big mistake because what you see isn't necessarily the truth. And I think one of the first people she meets is Littlefinger.
Yes.
So don't believe anything you see with Littlefinger, I feel. But so that's Kat's chapter. And then we're on to the last and the latest of our POV character entries in this book, and it's Sansa's chapter. The first time we get Sansa's chapter. And I want to say from the outset, I am not a Sansa hater by any stretch of the imagination. But I'll be a Sansa hater sympathizer for a minute, because this is a horrible way for any character to be introduced.
Yeah, it is.
I feel like we get all of the same kind of femininity that we get with Dany, with the textures and the textiles and all this kind of civilized behavior, and the objectification of Sansa is off the charts in this chapter. But it's okay because we're in a civilized part of the world. But she's just as much objectified as Dany. Maybe even more so, because there's knights kind of looking her up and down and laughing at her and testing what she knows and what she doesn't know. And then, she has all these kind of weird fantasies, and she idolizes Joffrey. She says, Sansa didn't know Joffrey, but she already knew she loved him. And it's just the expectations on Sansa. And I feel like this would have been Dany, had Dany, this is the kind of person Dany would have been. Had she been around these people all the time. Like, Sansa is doing exactly what she's supposed to be doing, and it's a very unfortunate way for. And I know George regrets the hate that Sansa gets. He doesn't like the hate that she gets, but I feel like it starts in this chapter.
She got to have been introduced deliberately this way. There's such a stark contrast between Arya and Sansa. Just every single example is about how Sansa is very different from Arya, and we've already met Arya a couple of times and we think she's great. So of course it's like we're completely standoffish with Sansa, and she seems to be even to the point where, I don't feel as sorry for Sansa losing Lady as I would have done if Arya had lost Nymeria at that point in the books. And that's been, I've been led to that point deliberately as a reader. I just want to say that Miriam's left a really good question, which we can actually pick up rather than going back to Kat's chapter. I think we can pick it up in Bran's chapter. But what she's asking is, could Bran have subconsciously tried to walk into Cat until he was able to slip into Summer, and that's why he could name him after? I think we've probably both got some thoughts about that. But yeah, great question, Miriam. We will get back to that when we get to the Bran chapter. Honestly, I've got very little to say on the Sansa chapter.
Actually, it's the least amount I have to say here. I think it's notable that she's scared of Arya at the beginning of this chapter, but she's scared of Joffrey at the end. I think that's and she needs to remember that, but she'll forget very quickly. But I found something I didn't pick up on, just how she's objectified in this chapter by Clegane, Barristan, Renly. They may not be looking at her in a sexual way, but just like, the daughter of the hand, like, and what is expected of her compared to nothing is expected of Arya. Do you know? Like there's a kind of a play, kind of like she should be like this, but the same level of expectation isn't on her. And Sansa just comes across as being very brainwashed, because she has been brainwashed. Her thoughts aren't her own, and I feel like of all the chapters we've had so far, this is the least honest, because she doesn't know how to be honest to herself.
Yes. If you think about every single piece of dialogue that's been aimed at Sansa in this chapter, if it had been swapped round and it had been Arya,
nobody would have a head. Everybody would be dead. She'd even have gone for Barristan in this chapter.
The point where the Hound says to Sansa, "Do I scare you?" And he doesn't, in a way. He doesn't scare her as much as Ilyn Payne, who I thought, I'd forgotten the details of this chapter, and when they were introducing the three knights and we got to the third stranger, the way that he was described, I actually thought was the Mountain at first. But it's not. It's Ilyn Payne, and she's absolutely terrified of him, even more than she is of the Hound. But yeah, I just thought it was quite funny. If the Hound had said that to Arya, "Do I scare you?" she probably would have been like, but no.
Yeah.
Not interested. But yeah, it's this is a horrible chapter for Sansa. It really is, and she's in my mind as a reader, she's now having to do an awful lot for me to be sympathetic towards her as a character, because she's so very different to Arya, and it's been
Arya
written that way.
Yeah, and Arya is who she will be for us. Whereas when we go back and read this chapter again, like I always think, oh, the cycle of abuse starts when she goes to King's Landing, or the cycle of abuse starts at the very end of this chapter with Joffrey just being horrible to her. But the cycle of abuse started with Sansa from the moment she was born. There was never going to be any other way for Sansa to go. She was going to have to be this lady. And so when they kill her, when her direwolf is killed in the next chapter, it's almost saying like Sansa never has a chance. Like she can never be herself. So she can never even have it like expressed through a direwolf, because everything has to be controlled by everybody else. Her life is completely controlled. So therefore she can't have a direwolf straight away. It's straight away gone. And I think I think it just underpins the tragedy of her story. And a lot of people would completely disagree with me on that and completely hate Sansa. I definitely do not hate Sansa. I think as we move through the series, she becomes one of the best written characters for me in a lot of ways, because so right now she has loads of expectations on who she is, who she has to be. Even Jon said that. We know where Sansa's going, but our expectations of who she is, I think, is flipped in more ways than it is with any other character that we've met so far. If that makes sense.
I agree. No, I completely agree. And I mean, to the point where she takes on a pseudonym, and but we get, I remember, I can't remember what it was for. It must have been for a particular video, but reading through all of Sansa's chapters in sequence. It's really interesting when you do that, actually. I've done that with a couple of characters before, with Arya, when I did a couple of years ago now, the Mercy chapter on Tony Teflon's channel. And it was going through all of the books, but just reading Arya chapters. And I did it for Sansa. And I think it was because of LaDonna, James and LaDonna, when they did a video on... they did lots of videos on Sansa, but about who killed Joffrey and everything that happened at the Purple wedding, and you do get a very different sense of the character developing, even though there may only be like 4 chapters in a book, and you know that, whoa, this is a book that has this, and they do all of these different events in it. It's quite interesting to do it that way. And Sansa does develop differently to how you would, you know, and at a different pace to the other characters within her own mind, within her own point of view. You know, and again, the point of view chapters are really the eyes on a particular situation, on a particular location. And Sansa travels around quite well. She's in King's Landing for quite a while, but you know, things develop as she moves away from different locations.
Yeah, she travels probably as she sees as much of Westeros almost as Dany sees of Essos in a way.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to chart them together actually, and I feel like George gets a lot of slack from feminists in particular with this book. But for me, just like as a person who teaches young women and having been a young woman, I feel like getting inside this head, like I definitely remember having those fantasies of like, oh, you know, it's so like equating like aesthetics with goodness, and a social status with goodness. And because you do fall into those traps when you're a young girl, because you're kind of, you're biologically programmed to recognize that in men. And it's the opposite of Dany, who's like terrified, and like we all can obviously like recognize that as well, that kind of terror when you first have to have sex and things like that. Like that's still a way away for Sansa. And I feel like George is very good at doing that. And I know that I think he had previous relationships with feminist writers actually, so like he must have run this by women, because it's and I don't want to undermine his abilities to write, but I definitely feel like he taps into what it is to be a young girl at that age and just kind of have all those kind of ideas and fantasies. It's very interesting. She didn't know him, but she already loved him. You know, I feel like
well,
that
we've got here two highborn daughters of the Warden of the North. Straight away, there's a title and there's an expectation there. But this is the chapter that identifies for us just how different these two daughters are. And Arya fights against being a highborn lady, and we get further into that as we go along through Arya's story arc. And with Sansa, it's the complete opposite. Those expectations are always there, like you say. It was all mapped out from her from the day she was born.
And she says, "You're spoiling it. You're spoiling it." To both
of them.
Yes,
you're spoiling it.
You're ruining the fairy tale. I'm supposed to get the fairy tale. It's like I think there's is it Barbie in Toy Story or something, like she's had a similar moment. But it's kind of like it. Yeah, I do agree. Like it's like as we move into Eddard, and I suppose we can move into Eddard now, unless you have anything else to say. No, but just as we move in, and like we realize very quickly in Ed's chapter that Arya has been missing for 4 days, and like he's heartbroken, and he says he almost faints with how heartsick he is. A similar kind of a connection to Arya, although not as extreme as Kat's with Bran, but he is and I think he feels much more of a connection with Arya because she looks like him. And later on in his chapter, when he asks Sansa to recall what happened with Joffrey and the attack, Sansa says she doesn't remember, but Ed says he knows the truth of it. And it's just like, I wish he'd say in that moment, but I suppose you can forgive him for not thinking, but like, how does he feel about Sansa in that moment? And does he instantly forgive her because she's in a situation where she's betrothed to the crown prince? So what can she say?
Well, I mean, it's a difficult position for Ned to be in, because it's, you know, there's like Arya's words against Joffrey, Sansa's words against Arya, and it's the annoying thing is, of course, in this chapter, it actually was all resolved until Cersei stepped in and demanded a wolf. But when he goes outside and has that moment with Lady, I mean, I thought that, you know, just sending her back to the north, like, really, all the way back to the north? Yes, she's got to go back to the north.
The Lannister woman won't get this pelt.
Yes, yeah. But he talks about how she was named perfectly for Sansa. So there's almost this kind of reverence around Sansa, even from her own father, you know, that she is a lady, and there's something just much more delicate about Sansa, which perhaps in his own point of view, that's just...
Yeah, well, Sansa as a lady, though, that's kind of like, that's the closest somebody like a woman can get to being a knight, because because she has made an oath. Presumably, they do some sort of pact when you become betrothed to a crown prince. There's some sort of oath you take. I don't know. We never hear anything about it, but I assume, like, I know in our own history that's definitely the case. Like when, like, in proper engagement, it's you know, there's a certain kind, in this time anyway, there's a certain legal precedent set for that, or at least a definite, strong, socially, morally important one. So the fact that she's a lady, it kind of makes me wonder, does he respect her because of the honor she has for that position? Because he respects honor. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, possibly.
So that's the one reason why he hates Jaime, because Jaime breaks his oath.
Yes.
Whereas, you know, and Sansa doesn't here. She's,
I suppose, in her own way, she's honourable. But yeah, I mean, I don't think we've not had reference to it yet, but Ned also seems to have a particular closeness with an affection, fondness for Arya above Sansa, possibly because she reminds him of his sister so much.
Yeah, that's definitely true as well. I loved how he started with that the Starks had been out searching for Arya, but the Lannister men had been hunting for her.
Yes.
And it's just like, God, like, can the Lannisters be any more evil? Again, as you were like, as you're pointing out, like, would it, if we'd got Lannister POV, would they be searching for her or hunting for her? Although with Clegane at the end of this chapter, it definitely seems. And when he finds out where Arya is, he says that he was almost fainted this morning. He was so heartsick, and that the fury has now filled him with a strength. And it's kind of ironic because the Baratheon words are, ours is the fury, right? And Robert is so weak in this chapter. He's so pathetic in this chapter. And it's not just because of Cersei. There's a definite kind of unease with the house they're in. They're in the Darry house. He's positioned himself in Darry's chair, but there's a definite there's a discomfort in the house that they're in. He's not in a friend's house.
No,
he has to show force, you know.
Yeah.
But he actually shows himself to be weak, because he ends up doing what the Queen tells him to do. And Ned says to him, would you not at least kill the wolf yourself? Which kind of reminds us of what he said to Bran in the first chapter, you know, and that a leader that, like, fails to do the execution himself, or, like, removes
doesn't understand death.
Doesn't understand death, So, and again, that's kind of him just pointing out how weak Robert is. Like, for me, and I don't know how you feel about this chapter, but for me, I mean, it definitely confirms that Cersei is terrible, but also that there is a definite break now in the relationship between Robert and Ned. That there's no coming together for this thing again. They're too far apart at this stage.
Yeah, it's very forced, and just relies on these sort of childhood, you know, the love that you had for me as a child, and you know, it's just
the love you had for my sister.
Yes, it's
Again, it's one of those things that it makes me wonder, is Robert also one of those people that's constantly being whispered to, and when it's convenient for the certain actions to happen, his blood needs to be up, but when it's not really important, he just kind of moves into this kind of helpless, kind of I don't know, very weak.
Yeah, somebody else will deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he just walks away. And I feel like, yeah, when he says children fight, it's over. That's very ironic because that's the sequel to this book is going to be all about their children fighting.
Yes. Yeah.
And a lot of what Robert says is scary in how it comes through. I feel like he says things that are very prophetic at times.
Yes. Yeah.
I think the worst thing about this chapter, apart from Lady being killed, is because a character that we actually got to see more of, which is Mycon, is hunted down and slaughtered by the Hound from above.
Yeah. Yeah.
And almost cut in two. And it's very symbolic of how the top people in society treat everybody else. It's horrible. It's horrific. And also the fact that Ned is more worried that it is going to be Nymeria, and how he's going to explain it to Arya, and then like I know it would be horrible to lose a direwolf, but just the fact that it's this young boy who didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah. Can you imagine if he hadn't have already found, if this had been on like, you know, day 3 or whatever rather than day 4, he could have thought that was Arya that was slumped over the horse. He was, I mean, tensions are running high from everybody in this chapter.
Yeah. Is he the first death, Mycon? Apart from John Arryn, is he the first death that we've seen? I think he is, right? And Lady, and then is Lady the first character to die then? Apart from sorry, everybody in the prologue. And, sorry. Apart from everybody in the prologue and all the people at Dany's wedding and the assassin in Bran's room, is Lady the first character to die? Apart from everybody else, what's the death? Okay, we have a question actually from Cedric. Hi, Cedric. Does he kill his feelings for Sansa? I presume you're talking about Ned there. And that's definitely something that we see Kat saying she lets go of Sansa and Arya in her heart. I wonder, does Ned let go of Sansa in his heart a little bit here?
Cedric, sorry, son of Miriam. Hi.
Yeah. So yeah, I kind of think I don't know if he kills his feelings for her, but I think he definitely boxes her off as being, that's Joffrey's wife now.
Which is a shame, because if that's the case, a mother's already let her go in her heart. So she's kind of like emotionally a bit of an orphan now, Sansa.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And siblings.
I'll just have to point out, because it's been said so many times over the years, again from LaDonna, any shipping the Hound and Sansa.
Yeah.
When Robert says get her a dog, she'll be happier for it. And obviously the Hound is referred to as the dog. But yeah, she's I mean, the way she describes the Hound isn't particularly romantic, you know. But she does say that she's not as scared of him as ill in pain, and so she should be.
Yeah, and she describes Joffrey as beautiful and golden, but but let's just remember, the Hound hunted down an innocent child and cut him in half. So
the more the sort of obvious symbolism there with lion's tooth as well. You know, if somebody's got teeth, it means that they've got some sort of, you know, chutzpah about them if you've got teeth.
Yeah.
And Joffrey loses his tooth, his lion's tooth, and you know, you see him reduced to saying to effectively little girls, "Don't hurt me, don't touch me." So you know, he's illustrated as a complete little shit, but also he loses his bite as well.
Yeah.
As far as, you know, there's just nothing to him really at all, apart from being an insidious little shit.
Yeah, and also the way Renly laughs at Robert. And Robert just says, "Can you escort my brother?" He doesn't scold him. Like, you're laughing at the Crown Prince.
Yeah.
Again, just this thing like, what the hell is going on with you and your brothers?
So it also makes you think that there's just very little faith in Robert at this point when he refers to, you know, Ned, you deal with your child and I'll deal with mine. And it's like, no, you won't. No, you won't. There's, you know, Joffrey's there with a big grin on his face and he's got his mother protecting him. And it's just, yeah, that family have clearly got issues.
Yeah, and also, like, I definitely don't agree with Lady being killed. But Cersei isn't entirely wrong in the sense that the Crown Prince was attacked. Whether he's wrong or right, he's still like the Crown Prince. Like in our own world, someone would be made suffer for the scarring of a Crown Prince. Now, I definitely don't agree it should be a lady, and I wouldn't have wanted to see Nymeria attacked or killed either. But it is like he either berate Joffrey more for not having the balls to stand up to two girls, or a girl and a young boy, or fully go for it. Like, be more decisive, be a king. Like, be like, nobody's asking you to, you know, be as wise as Solomon here, but at least be somewhat decisive in the action. At least have some sort of plan for how you're going to call all these people into this room, have it out, but at least know, well, if it goes this way, and this way, I'll do this, or this. Like, you're supposed to be a judge. You're supposed to have the powers of the land and the law, and it's I know I'm terrible for Robert bashing, but I feel like
yes, he's an impotent king,
definitely, in more ways than one. Okay, so we're on to the last chapter, which is the Bran chapter. It's the shortest, or one of the shortest chapters, I think, that we're going to be looking at. Yeah, it is. It's a very short chapter, but a very rich chapter in terms of symbolism and imagery for everything that's going to come forward and or come after this, and also a fan favorite. This chapter, it must be said. It's chapter 17. And it starts with, it seemed as though he'd falling for years. So, yeah.
Well, this whole chapter is Bran having a dream. Apart from maybe a few words at the end of the chapter, everything about this is Bran's dream. I listened to this very quickly before we got together and came on air. So I've just made a few notes about this, really. There's, as you say, laden with symbolism, and this really is the chapter where you could look at this and say, right, okay, Bran is going to be a huge, this sets up Bran as a huge prophet of the story later on down the line. It's all about his dream, and the theme of the dream is the fall. All of it is the fall, the falling, him falling in his dream from wherever. And we know that up high is you somehow invisible up high, but he's falling through, it seems like, through time, through past, through a variety of different things. As he gets nearer to the ground, it feels as though things are becoming a bit clearer to him. So as he's, even though the concept is I'm going to die when I hit the ground, you feel as though things seem to he sees a lot more. Things seem to, you know, he's experiencing something, and it's not just a dream. It clearly somebody is there with him or trying to communicate with Bran. And it's manifested in the crow, who says a number of prophetic things. So you've got the crow saying things like, fly, don't cry, you're not falling, use a different type of wing. So he's there to encourage Bran to experience what he's experiencing, and to, you know, it's almost kind of like, you're doing it, come on, you're doing it. And Bran, as he's falling, and I'm thinking that, you know, he knows that the weirwood's seeing him, so it starts with So he's kind of going down like this in the dream, and as this is happening, first of all he can see Winterfell, then he can see the rest of Westeros, then he can see the whole world, it seems, as far, you know, he's talking about further on that you can see things that are happening, and these things are happening. You know, it's like we know that these things are happening in the Trident, and we know that this is the location of Cat, so we know that this is happening right now. And the weirwood sees him, and he knows that the weirwood sees him, and it just feels like the nearer to the ground he gets, the stronger this power seems to be manifesting itself. I can't believe that there's a line in here that I cannot ever remember reading before, which is where he turns to the north and he sees Jon at the wall. And so I suppose that's kind of Bran's way in his own mind of being able to say goodbye to Jon, because he sees him there on the road. But that we're basically told here, right, you've got it, this is it, this is why you've got to wake up, you've seen it now, we've gone way up north and there's this curtain of light, and he's looked beyond that, and apparently he's seen the heart of winter. Well, of course there's going to be a million different interpretations of what that is and what that could be, but what we're being told here is, you come on, wake up, we've shown you here where you need to be placed in all of this, what you're able to do, what your capabilities are. You're doing it right now. When you hit the ground, you know, that's it. But going back to so I can't believe that I didn't read that before, because it's like, oh, right,
the line about the heart of winter's one.
Yes.
Okay.
So he sees everything that's like, okay, yeah, you can see Winterfell, you can see it, and then there's this wildly magical moment where you can see further than anyone else's, you know, the land of always winter, and at this location there is a curtain of light, and beyond that is the heart of winter. I can't even remember reading this before.
It says where nothing lives or something.
Yes. Yeah. So it's that seems massive, and clearly, you know, the Crow's trying to communicate to him, now you know what this is and why you have to wake up. And just going back to what Miriam was saying before about, was Bran warging Cat, I think that this chapter is the chapter that illustrates to us as readers that there's a definite, if he can see everything that's going on, why can't he know everything that's going on? And if he knows everything that's going on, I'm not saying that this is necessarily here's Bran the time traveler, but this is the introduction to Bran's capabilities, and one of those capabilities is that he's able to walk into Summer, into Hodor, into, you know, why could he, maybe subconsciously this could have been something where he was communicating through his mother, and he wanted his mother there, so maybe it was Bran that wanted her there rather than her wanting to, feeling like, you know, why is she given up all of the other children, to forsaken all of them to be with Bran? Or maybe that's because Bran's forcing her to be there, who knows. But I absolutely think that when he, at the very end of the chapter, when he opens his eyes and says, oh, by the way, the direwolf is Summer, I think he knows Summer's name, because he's already seen it. He's already seen this before, and this is the first indication, the fact that he knows, because he doesn't wake up and says, oh yeah, I've been thinking about it and I think Summer's quite a nice name, Summer's a pretty name. He opens his eyes and says,
her name is,
yes, yeah, this
now
is,
her
you know,
name will be,
yeah. It's like, didn't you know, we already know that though, don't we? So, you know, it's yeah, that's what happened. I certainly believe that that's what's happened.
Yeah, I don't think he's warging Cat. I don't, because Cat is still very conscious in the chapter. It's not like I don't think he's taken over her. I think he is definitely, she is there because he needs the protection of his mother.
Yeah.
Because we don't know at what point he has started, like this dream has started. We don't know how long it's lasting. We don't know if this is a journey that he's gone through since the moment he got thrown from the window.
Yeah.
So I don't think he has the, well, I suppose he could time travel into her, but I don't necessarily think it's Bran. I think it might be Bloodraven keeping Cat in the room. I don't necessarily think it's Bran. So I'm not sure. I don't know if it's a warg though, because I don't think we could have her POV if it was. Does that make sense? I don't know if it would. I think there's just her instincts as a mother are heightened by some sort of manipulation on her part. A line that I missed the first couple of times is how he sees the Godswood. The Godswood is looking at itself in the water. So the Godswood are clearly sentient and aware, self-aware. And I don't know what to make of that, really. It's like almost this Lacan type moment where like they see themselves and they recognize themselves, and I don't know if that's him. I'm not sure.
I think if he hadn't of, this is really wacky thinking, but before I carry on, hello to Margaret, and also Cedric.
Oh, hi, Margaret.
Cedric was saying Summer and Hodor influenced Bran while he was warging. Summer and Hodor influenced Bran while he was warging. So Catelyn could still have a point of view. Yeah, maybe Summer point of view. That's 80%. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's. I think there's a pull there, definitely, and maybe it's a subconscious thing. But that would explain Cat's irrational flip-flopping.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something there. Again, with Robert though as well, there's an irrationality there that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but it would if somebody was mind controlling them or influencing their thoughts and behaviours. It feels as though, to me, like say, this is a bit of a wacky idea, but if he hadn't have woken up, I'm not sure he would have. It just feels like his powers were getting stronger and stronger and stronger as part of this descent, that maybe he would have just like fallen through the earth, where would roots and everything are, and that would be, that's where he would kind of open his third eye and be able to sort of like, okay, this is who I am and this is my destiny and what I need to do. Because he doesn't, he's shown his abilities here, but he could, he's waking up, and as a 7-year-old child, it's like, whoa, that was a really weird dream.
Yeah.
But within the dream, the crow says to it, he notices that he's got the, Jaime's golden curly hair in his hand where he must have grabbed it as he was falling. And the crow says to him, forget about all of that. That's just not input. These matters of the realm and these physical that, this is a new metaphysical plane that we're on here. Things are different. And this is, so this is where it begins for Bran in his third chapter. But yeah, he wakes up and knows Summer's name because he's kind of like he's already lived that life kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that whole thing, forget that, you don't need that now. It's very angry. It's very forceful. I think, or I read it as being very angry. I think this is all about, and this is kind of coming full circle from what we started with Dany's chapter. This is all about Bran needs to completely abandon his ego. He is not allowed to have this individuality. You can fly or you can cry. If you're going to cry, that means you're emotional. That means you've got your ego. If you're going to obsess over who Jaime is, that means it's your ego. So he needs to completely let that go. I thought it was very interesting that he sees Llewellyn looking through a telescope and he's frowning. Lewin, Lawrence Llewellyn, what's his name? The interior designer. No, Lewin is he's frowning. Yeah. He didn't like the red walls.
He's redecorating the rookery. They've got him in to sort out the fire, the tower.
Yeah. They spent a fortune on the wallpaper and put lino on the floor. It doesn't make any sense. So yeah, Lewin is frowning while looking through the telescope, which I thought, is that Lewin seeing the comet, or like what is that?
Yes. Yeah.
I wasn't sure
yeah,
what
probably.
that was. And yeah, he sees Robb taller and stronger. Is that Robb now or the Robb in the future? Because I wondered, was he going back and forth here a little bit? He sees Roderick and Cat leave. He sees the trident. He sees Ned and Robert pleading with him, and then he sees Sansa crying herself to sleep. So
yeah,
it is now, but it's accelerated. Like it's happening at kind of a random time. He also sees Arya holding her secrets hard in her heart. What does Arya have? What secrets does she have right now? She doesn't. So, like a needle isn't a secret hard enough to hold in your heart, is it? At this stage,
I think,
or is that future Arya?
Well, we know right now that Arya is an adventurer. She's an explorer. She doesn't want to be a lady. She doesn't want to marry and have a castle. So we can possibly presume that she's got some plans to be, I'm not saying to be a faceless man, but to, you know, her like secret hope for being something different to how a sister is expected to be.
So the thing that has the fandom, that often gets the fandom going, is the next thing after he talks about Arya. He says there's shadows all around them, and then he describes a man made of ash, which we assume might be the Hound, because he goes on to suggest it's the Hound, and then a man armed and tall and golden, and then a guard who, when you look into his helm, there's nothing there, just darkness. So is that Robert Strong?
Yeah.
And then he sees...
Yeah.
No, so yes, then he sees... Yeah, go on. Yeah, sorry.
I was just because I was going to say, I think that's the main... Like most people accept that's... But again, maybe that's just because it's so obvious later on down the line that that's the mountain.
Yeah, because Margaret says that it's future Arya and future Sansa. I think both of the lines, like Sansa crying herself to sleep, like she will do that for pretty much the next few years. Yeah. And Arya will hold secrets hard to her heart. Like that incident in their lives is very, it precedes Ned's death, and it really does define them as young girls going forward. That moment with Joffrey and Cersei, and he also sees dragons stirring beyond the sunrise when he goes across Pentos and Ashai and everything. And it made me wonder: is that Dany's dragons, or because Dany's dragons will, like, they're either very close to being born at this point, right? Because when he wakes up, they must be like heating up, right? The eggs are starting to move.
Well, there's lots of there's arguments to be had here that this is a kind of magical chain of events. Yeah. Lady dies, which somehow prompts this connection between Summer and Bran. So that you know, and certainly in the TV show, I think the minute that happened, that Ned in the TV show kills Lady, that's the very next scene is Bran waking up in bed. So the accepted theory is that there's a kind of magical chain of events that happen all at the same time within different chapters, but we can presume that it's exactly the same moment in time, that Lady dies, that Bran wakes up, that Daenerys dragons are hatched, that the comet appears in the sky. You know, this could all be happening on the same day, in the same moment, in the same hour. It's a catalyst for some magic, you know, possibly waking the dragon or whatever, you know, all of that.
Yeah, the thing I would say though is that you said that like, what is he seeing, and he's seeing quite a lot. I do think there's a big thing with Bran, and it kind of goes back to what I said with Kat as well, that seeing is not knowing. And And just because he can see things doesn't mean he has any extra knowledge necessarily. He can see a lot. He can see inside people clearly, as people hold secrets to their heart and stuff. But I wonder, like, I'm always a little bit wary with Bran and Bloodraven about how much they can actually know. Yeah, so that's the other thing. Cedric says, Arya wants to be a lady but can't because she feels ugly with brutal hands. So that's her secret, probably. Oh, maybe. Yeah, that's definitely one of her secrets for sure, that she can't be Sansa. Yeah. And yeah, the other thing that I wanted to bring up here, and it's the last thing I wanted to bring up, is just the crow saying, "Got any corn?" And I can't remember if this was you, like a long time ago, saying something about corn being a code for information. Was that you, or was that MP, or am I thinking of someone else? Maybe it could have been LaDonna even. That corn is like a symbol for information.
Yeah. I can't remember if it was me.
Even the fact that the crows can say, because crows can say that in outside of the dream, they can say corn, right? At the wall.
Yeah, well, ravens used to be able to.
Or ravens could say that. Aha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there was a language that, you know, the Meisters and the ravens used to be able to communicate with each other. Apparently, that, you know, that's
so do the ravens not trust the Meisters anymore?
Maybe not. Yeah, I mean, yeah, interesting.
So that's all I have on.
Yeah,
I think we did well this week. It kept us considerably shorter, which was my fault for trying to do too much last week, I think. But the big announcement is we're going to move to Sundays. So hopefully that'll help people who are working on Saturdays as well, but also help us to kind of get ourselves sorted over the weekend. And I'm in Ireland, so you'll actually see me in Ireland next week. Hopefully the Wi-Fi will be fine. So can we say 7 o'clock Irish UK time? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Perfect. Just so that I get time. So
and that'll be every week from now. Will be 7 p.m.
Is
on
that okay
Sundays.
with you, or like?
You know, that's fine with me. Yeah, I'm just clarifying it for the couple of people watching and anyone watching after this. It'll be a regular Sunday.
Yeah. So 7. Do the clocks change next week or the week after? I think they change the week after. I can't remember. Anyway, so 7 p.m. UK time next week.
Yeah, they go forward
on Sunday. Move forward, yeah. So yeah, and we're going to read to the end of Bran 4. I think we only have 7 chapters again. Yeah, 7 chapters next week, so it's not as heavy reading, but yeah, we're reading to the end of Bran 4. So yeah, we don't see Bran again until the end of our reading next week. So if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments, and I'll answer them during the week. And if not, we'll see you all next Sunday. Thank you so much, Claire, for being here.
You're
again.
Welcome. I enjoy it.
Thanks to everybody who joined us in the chat as well. Yeah. Okay. So see you all next week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.